Okay, so at the end of the webinar today, we're going to ask for a bit of feedback, if that's okay with you all. So look out for a QR code with a wee dinosaur in it, and that will be on the slide at the end. So moving on to the next slide, we're joined by Glenn Liddall, who most of you will probably know from Glenn promoting this and known him personally as well. So Glenn probably doesn't need much of an introduction. He is the founder of People Know How, and McKinney HR have worked with Glenn on various projects, and he's kindly agreed to share his recent experience of working through significant change at the charity today. Rona, our senior HR business partner, will be hosting a conversation with Glenn today, and Rona supported Glenn and his teams through the recent redundancy process and has worked in HR for 18 years. Rona's also been with McKinney HR for the last 3. Just in case some of you don't know much about McKinney HR, I'm just going to give a quick overview of what we do, so that you know who we are and where to find us if you need us. As you can see in the slide, our mission is to create environments where people and teams thrive, and our services are listed on the slide. So we offer, our services are split into improve and resolve, and you can see some of those that we do on the screen. So as I mentioned earlier, Rona leads the HR business partnering service and works personally with most of our clients, and the majority of our clients are charities. So Rona's very familiar with the challenges of funding and the constant change in this sector. As a thank you for attending today, we're offering a free 1-hour confidential chat with Rona, should any of you benefit from some initial HR advice. Glenn's going to start the session today with some background information on the current situation in the sector, just to set the scene. And after that, Rona's going to provide an overview of the restructure and redundancy process, some legal obligations and best practice. Then we'll move on to the discussion with Glenn before finishing off with some time for questions, some feedback please, and signposting for further information. You'll see some links at the end. We obviously welcome your own questions for Glenn, and I'll be managing the chat box today, so please put anything in there and we will get to them at the end. Over to you, Glenn.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the call today. I just wanted to say a few thank yous before we kind of dive into things. First of all, to say thank you to McKinney HR for hosting this webinar and giving us the opportunity to talk a bit more about the experiences that we've had. Also, some personal thanks. I was kind of thinking this morning, I've missed a slide. Actually, I've missed a couple of slides, but I'll come on to that later on. And one is to thank, and this is for all of us in the third sector, in work life, our loved ones, our families. I'm thinking, through this process, especially, who got my bad moods, who got my, it's been a difficult day, and it was my wife, it was my 3 sons, it was my people around me. So I think we want to thank them and appreciate them as we start this webinar. Secondly, I want to thank many of you that are on the call that I know really quite well. I've worked with you in the sector for many, many years. And it has really been quite overwhelming, just the number of messages I've had for people of support, offers of a coffee, can I do anything to help? Really, really appreciated that. If I haven't got back to you personally yet, my apologies. I still have an inbox in my emails here to kind of get back and reply to people. Some people were really kind in sending quite lengthy messages. So thank you for that. I also want to say thank you to my colleagues within People Know How. Really could not have got through this process, and we'll come to that a little bit later. Without the support of the leadership team, the wider staff team as well were really part of this, and while being so impacted, were equally in the same breath kind of thinking about how they could make it better for their colleagues, for the people that we supported, etc. All of our VIPs, our volunteers, interns and placement students were also a big part of that, and the board. I just wanted to quickly kind of thank everybody before we moved on to the webinar. In terms of the current slide and funding, if you're in the third sector, I don't need to tell you, it's a really, really difficult time. The quotes there are just from the latest SCVO third sector tracker. One of the slides I kind of felt I missed when I was looking at this again this morning was just to kind of list what I see as the sort of the perfect storm that's affected people now and the sector over the last year or so. So, you know, we've all seen that there's been reduced funding, especially from the public sector, from Scottish Government, from local authority funding. All those funds are under pressure and have been reduced in one way or another. Funds that are left, so public sector, trusts, foundations, etc., are often now so oversubscribed. You'd have a oversubscription of sort of 2 or 3 times. Now you hear ridiculous figures like being oversubscribed 10, 20, 30 times for a fund. Lots of funds have been closed, have been under review. That's led then to changing criterias. And also we know ourselves how costs have increased. Inflation figures were out yesterday again. So costs of services of running things is increasing, and the demand for our services goes up and up and up as well. That's really all I wanted to say about funding and costs within the third sector. I think most people on the call are experts themselves. Don't need to say any more about it. I'll pass over to you, Rona, I think.
Thanks, Glenn. So yeah, we're very conscious that in the audience today, we've got quite a mix of people. So, there will be some of you who have already gone through some restructures, perhaps some redundancy. There might be some of you who don't have any experience at all. So I could talk for a long time about the legal obligations and best practice, but what we wanted to do today was just summarize it. So there's a lot of information on the screen here. We've done a roadmap to show you the key stages to go through, right from planning through announcement, consultation, the selection process, the outcome, and then thinking beyond that. So we will send this slide out with the after information. So you'll get this later. So don't worry about reading all the information on the slide today. And we know that also the situation can be very different if you're going through redundancy with potentially 2 to 3 posts, or like People Know How did, having to go through a complete closure is a very different situation. So really this is going to give you an overview of the theory before we go into the People Know How case study and ask them some questions. So the first one is planning and business case. And I think just to emphasize here, the most important thing is spend as much time as possible planning things out, looking at alternatives, looking at your costs and documenting it as well. So if you've got a bit of a paper trail at this stage, it can be really useful, and you might need it further down the line during consultation to answer questions, but also to actually support any decisions that have been made at the early stages if anything's challenged later down the line. Also, having a think about what knowledge you've got in the organisation, who's had experience before, and then what guidance you need. So we'll talk about support from HR, but there might be some other support that you could benefit from, whether it's financial support, legal advice as well. So thinking early, who do you need to involve is really useful, and getting them involved at an early stage as well. So then you're looking at the announcement once you've got some thoughts about who is going to be involved and affected, and you're starting to look at the announcement. And some of the key things I would say here is having a think about who should actually be there at the announcement. We worked with Glenn and talked about the tone of the announcement, how much information to put in the announcement, not to rush it, to make sure that there's enough time in whatever format the announcement is going to take. And all of that is going to be tailored to your specific situation. And obviously, if it's a small restructure versus a large-scale redundancy. And then confirming what was discussed in writing, that's something that is throughout the whole process, obviously, just keeping your records there. So consultation, numbers 3 and 4, you might not have collective consultation, might just be individual consultation, and that'll be down to the numbers that are involved. So there's specific information that you need to give over at collective consultation, and that will include some key information like the reason for the proposed redundancies, which you can take out from your business case. Having a look at the number and descriptions of the posts that are proposed for redundancy or restructure, and the total number of employees that will be affected. Having a look at the calculation of redundancy payments as well, and if there are any agency workers involved. So for collective consultation, there's going to be other actions that come into play there. So you might need to have some representatives. Some of them may step forward as volunteers. You might need to do some communication to try and get some reps in to come forward for that. Then you're going to have a look at tailoring it to the individual circumstances. So for example, in the individual consultation, have a think about who would actually hold the individual consultations. How many managers do you have? So if you're a small charity, that can be a challenge. Then having a think about briefing them, what support did the managers need with actually preparing for the individual consultations. They might need some scripts. There could be HR support, note-taking, and then there's the planning out of when to hold the meetings, and that all depends on your numbers involved as well. Documenting the process as you go, and communication is really important just right throughout the whole journey. So being empathetic, making sure there's space for people to ask questions. Consultation needs to be meaningful, so that's the reference that is used legally. So you need to make sure that you can show that questions have been answered and there's been opportunity along the way. Any ideas that come forward would need to be considered as well and responded to. The selection process, really important that that's documented. It's very clear what criteria are being used. You might not have scoring if it's a single person in a single post. So then that's a different scenario. If there's any concerns about the selection criteria, that needs to be addressed before you go forward and actually do any scoring. Then on to the final outcome. So we've got a few things on the slide there. You would be providing notice of termination, the right to apply for a alternative work outside employment and having time off to do that. Also having a look at whether somebody's eligible for redundancy pay or not. And that comes down to length of service as well. Having the right to appeal the process as well. Or it could be that there's a suitable alternative role within the organisation and it's simply going to be a move. But in that case, there's a right to a 4-week trial period. Then we've put in section 7 or phase 7 is outplacement and further support. So once the outcome's made, that's not the end of the process. You need to think beyond that, making sure that you're actually supporting employees. And we've been touching base with Glenn this morning, asking him, about what contact he's had with some of the staff he's worked with, how they're getting on finding alternative work. And there's lots that you can do there. So thinking about support for CV reviews, perhaps linking in with recruitment contacts, helping with LinkedIn profile updating, networking, interview support. So all of that will come down to what the individual support your actual employees need, and that can come out as part of the consultation as well. So conscious there's a lot there, but we want to give you a flavour just now. As Lindsay has said, we're available for looking at this in more detail with you with the 1 hour free support. So that will hopefully give you a good starter today, some things to think about. But we want to move on and focus on the people know-how case study as well, and talk about Glenn's experience. So we'll move on to that. So Glenn, do you want to talk us through your facts on the slides?
Yeah, just so most people will know people on how. We had 24 people enroll, mostly full time at the time of starting the redundancy process and the closure. We have around about 100 VIPs annually with us, volunteers, interns, and placement students. And that's just kind of the indication of our last year of income and expenditure. Probably the comment on that is that was the very first year when we actually didn't increase our reserves, when we actually had to use our reserves. So the charity had been going for 9-10 years at that stage, and each year we'd managed to put aside a little bit for a rainy day, and just kind of, I suppose, illustrates how it started to rain the year before. We've always talked about ourselves as a social innovation charity, and the image on the right-hand side there kind of illustrates how we work, that we would work with people and communities to really get a sense of what they need, what they want, what ideas they have. So that's the kind of ask part of the process. We always look at working in an evidence-based way. Do is very literally the service delivery aspect of people know-how, and then we're really keen to share our learning as well. The organisation that's then further developed, we still have 2 PhD students working with us with the University of Edinburgh. They're ongoing, and we had started to work in the space of campaigning, influencing as well. Our main areas of work, again, a lot of you will be very familiar with this, our work around digital and social inclusion, our work to support children on the move from primary to secondary school, and say the work that we were doing around research and campaigning. Our website's still live. If you want more information, you can click on the link there and find out more. Thank you, Rona. Are we going to move to the next slide? Yeah, okay. So you might think, what's the image on the right? So it's a bit of clip art. It's meant to be the Grand Canyon, I think, in the States. It was really to kind of illustrate what I felt had happened to us. As I said previously, we'd managed to build reserves. We'd had really mixed sources of income. We'd had some unrestricted income over the years, and we'd managed to build our reserves up until 23-24, when we did have to start using those reserves. We'd at the time of finally starting to close the service, the charity, we'd actually had 26 consecutive unsuccessful funding applications, which, in my experience over almost 30 years, if you had 3 or 4 knockbacks in a row, you kind of think, oh, what are we doing wrong? How are we're missing the mark? At the time of making the announcement that we were going to go into consultation, that number was at 17, and that number then just continued to climb and climb and climb. We'd always been very, very successful at funding. We'd always put a lot of work and effort into it, a lot of resources into it, and we somehow just hit a stage where it doesn't matter how many applications we put in, how good they were, how specific, matched to criteria they were. We just weren't being successful anymore. So there's a kind of realization that hard work is not going to crack this. I spoke in the previous slide at the beginning around the sort of funds closing and that sense of the challenges across the sector, not just for people in Hay, but for others in the sector as well. Going back to the image, we had some reserves, which, when you start a process like this, look quite healthy. And then you look at how you're going to kind of burn through that cash if there's not money coming in, and it doesn't last very long. So we had to make some really quick decisions. Effectively, the reserves we had would have kind of, if you imagine kind of building a bridge across that canyon, and on one side, we're sitting in this year. We're looking ahead to the next financial year, so 25-26. And already we knew that there wasn't funding building up as we would expect, to be dropping into place from all of our usual sources. And we had about 4 main sources of funding that were all saying that they would be able to tell us if we were going to be successful with more funding in kind of February, March of this year. And we simply couldn't continue to step out in faith that we could build a bridge across the canyon a third of the way, and we would then have run out of money. And if we hadn't been successful with those funding applications, we would then been at risk of the charity being insolvent. And I guess part of the purpose of this webinar, and really wanting to kind of speak to people, is how we quickly realized the situation that we were in. And we really wanted to make sure that if we were going to close the charity and end, we wanted to do that in the best way possible. We quickly termed a phrase of having a soft landing. I'm still working on things now in terms of wanting to tie up all of the kind of loose ends and really just leave the sector in the best possible way that we can. We're also working on a legacy project as well to pass the baton for some of our pieces of work. So we took the decision quite quickly. I think we could have kind of struggled on. We could have taken that risk that the funding might have come in. We could have looked possibly at reducing the size of the staff team dramatically, but there still being a core team. But we looked at all those. The risk was just too great for ending up in a situation of insolvency, and then not being able to wind up the charity in an organised and responsible manner. But it would then happen, very, very quickly. And if you're into insolvency, that's a whole new. We then have a set of insolvency accountants and lawyers on the call, not a HR company. That's a whole different situation to be faced with. I think probably we can move to the next slide, Rona.
I think it's probably a good point now, Glenn, if we can go into the conversation, because we've had lots of conversations so far and looking back, but I think it's good to share some of the questions I had for you. For example, you've set the scene there, and you've been having board questions and decisions, and then you reached out to me at that point. So what was it that made you specifically reach out for HR advice?
I suppose one of the things that really, really helped us, and I think you kind of have it on your slide there, number 1, around sort of planning and the business case. That planning can start even before you're in this situation. So we actually, we'd worked with McKinney HR to do a restructure about 3 years ago, an organizational redesign process. We were actually looking at reviewing our people policies with you as a piece of work. So we've always been really invested in our staff, our team, wanting to be a good employer, wanting to develop people. So when it came to looking for HR support, we were already kind of in that mindset, if that makes sense. So it wasn't a huge leap of faith to go, actually, we need some help here. I knew nothing about redundancy, had never been experienced, on either side of the fence with redundancy. So very, very quickly knew we needed to reach out for some help and support to run the process properly. I think the other aspect probably that kind of makes you reach for HR support as well is there's the kind of human aspect. So the things I've already spoken about how do we do this well? How do we do this in a way that's really respectful, is dignified for for our team? But then you're faced with, there's all these legal obligations, there's all this employment legislation that I'm not really familiar with. I'm not a HR expert. I'm a leader in the third sector. So it was really wanting to kind of reach out and find out, gosh, what do we need to do? And yeah, there was lots of things that I found out very, very quickly. It was on a really steep learning curve in terms of these are the things you need to do. This is the process that you need to follow.
Yeah, and I think what was really useful from a support side is that you were coming to us asking the questions early, as you said, which means that we didn't have to go in and unpick certain things. And then we could help you get that balance right with the legal approach, but also having that empathy at the same time. And we had a couple of useful calls where it was just, right, ask your questions, Glenn. So yeah, it was good for us that you came in at an early stage. But do you think, from your perspective, do you feel that the employees and the people you supported, so you talk about your VIPs, do you feel they felt the process was managed as well as it could have been given the circumstances?
It's a really difficult question, isn't it? Because yeah, the outcome wasn't good. You know, but what we would have liked is to have kind of gone into that consultation and found something which I hadn't found, which the board hadn't found, by way of it, you know, for us to be able to continue and carry on. So the nice outcome would have been, oh gosh, look, there is a way of us continuing and everyone keeping their jobs. In terms of the process, I think, yeah, I feel that we did as well a good a job as we could to support people, to be respectful, to allow as much time as we could. I think there's a slide coming up where I kind of talk a little bit about time, and it's like time is just like you're so short of time to actually do things. So the kind of the drive, there feels like there's two drivers. One of the kind of like, this is what we have to do, this is what the law says, this is what employment legislation says, and then there's this kind of human bit, and the two things don't often kind of marry up. So I suppose the work to do is to find ways to communicate, to work with people, to explain the process. This is why we kind of have to do things this way, but then trying to make it human at the same time. You were talking again in that lovely diagram about, you know, having scripts and sending people letters. So those are all things that are great, completely anti all of our values. And it's like we wouldn't go into a meeting normally with a script that you kind of would read through, and you wouldn't like send somebody an official letter. So that way of working was I suppose quite a shock to me and a shock to our team, that like, why is Glenn talking in this strange language? But it's like we have to, because that's the path we have to follow to be on the right side of the law. And that law, those employment processes are there to protect employees as well, whilst it might not feel that way for people on the receiving end. I hope I've explained that well.
Yeah, I think you've done great there, Glenn. And you know, what's in my mind as well is that you also had, or people know how, had really good support with communications, because you had your internal communications, two people working, and actually they were reps as well. So that was really useful. And some charities won't have access to communications staff members, but if you do, that's definitely something that I think worked very well in the people know how situation. So reading over any information before it went out to the staff to make sure that it was in people know how speak. So it's still ticking the legal boxes, it's still following process, but it just sounded more like your cultural speak. Yeah. Were there any other factors that, you know, aside from communication support, that you think contributed to people feeling that it was well managed?
I think, and again, so I was kind of giving a nod to the team at the top of this call, the real sense of duty, of obligation, of commitment that the team had to the people and communities that we supported. That was so quickly, yeah, their thoughts as well. But what about the children that I support? What about the digital groups that I'm running? What about the volunteers? And I think it was about working with people to do as part of kind of the soft landing, the kind of ending things on well, to give people that time and space to do what we could, but equally to help people to kind of be realistic in terms of that's as far as we can take things. You know, we can't make it any better. But I think having that appreciation, that probably surprised me a little bit. Of just, I knew I had a caring, empathetic, bunch of people, but to be so thoughtful and so kind and so considerate to the people that they were sort of supporting when they were being faced with redundancy was quite humbling to see. I think I was talking to you on a call recently, and how there were people literally 30 minutes from leaving the office for the last time, and they were still making that phone call to a referrer, or talking to a family, or trying to kind of close things off the best way they possibly could for the people that we were supporting. So I think it's that helping people to have that space and time to do that, but equally helping them to perhaps work through their guilt, their anxiety, their worries, and that there's only so far we can go to make those things right.
Yeah, and I think, from the experience from my side looking in, I think people know how I was very good at giving people space in their individual consultations to make sure that those types of questions and anxieties were able to be addressed. So not sticking, yes, there's a script and it covers the HR legal obligation points, but also there will be other questions that people have, and making sure that there's time and space to answer those as well. So I think that worked very well.
I mean, the other things we tried to do, which we did do, I think, was around helping people to start to look for other employment. And people approach that in different ways. For some people, I think it was a very quick move into looking at applications, filling in applications, getting interviews. For other people, they were very much, no, I need to take a bit of time. I want there to be a bit of a gap between one role and the next. Was very, very conscious of, people have mortgages, rents to pay, families. So people's certain personal situations and circumstances varied considerably. But really wanting to help and support people in the best way that we could. And we had some really good support from yourselves, from some of the other kind of specialist employment services. And actually one of our board members is the chair and CEO of a HR recruitment company. And they were really generous, again, with their time and the things you were talking about earlier about helping people to look at their LinkedIn profile, helping people to look at their, brushing up on their interview skills. And those kind of things to support employment.
Yeah, and we've got some links to some of those support places that people can contact afterwards, and that'll get sent out as well. Okay, so that's thinking about what went well. What did you find the most challenging about the process?
I probably I'm not sure if the time slide is coming up next or soon or whatever, but it probably illustrates it really well if we can bring that slide up.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So for me, and my wife was like, stop going on about this. But for me, there was a real challenge around time, because there were in one sense, time went so fast, and in other senses, time went so slow. So take, for example, the 30-day consultation period, I think at times felt like an eternity. And when will this ever come to an end? And people were almost like, can you just tell us now what the outcome is going to be? And can we just get to that stage? And then there are other ways where these things just went so quickly. I think what I found really difficult was kind of holding that sense of things going fast and things going slow, and things going fast and slow for different people at different times. So I might be feeling, gosh, we need to be communicating about something, and I think we're doing that quite quickly. And the people on the receiving end might feel like, we've had to wait 3 days for that email or that piece of information. The kind of sense of wanting to be there for people. And I suppose this is where, again, huge thanks to the leadership team for being able to support the team and just being able to have that cup of tea, have a conversation, have a coffee. Because I was very conscious that whilst I might want to have all those conversations and be really supportive to people, if I couldn't actually get on and do the things that needed to be done, they'd never get done. So at times that felt quite a tension, to kind of go, do you know what? I don't have 10 minutes, because it's, when people say they've got 10 minutes, it never is 10 minutes, is it? It's always an hour. It's like, actually, I don't have that hour, because if I do that, I'll not be doing something else. And that was, again, the team were really, really good at working together, at supporting each other, at being there for each other, and having, you know, again, sort of separate, you know, WhatsApp groups and communication, ways of communicating, ways of meeting together as teams, as small groups. But yeah, that was the biggest thing I felt, was this sense of time, working in different ways.
Excellent. And yeah, I would say it's your leadership team and all your staff, but the reps were very active. I felt, you know, they were very quick at communicating both directions. So I felt you had a very good active rep group, and that made quite a difference as well. Okay, so you've mentioned the board at the start of the process, and I felt that you had a strong relationship with the board. How important do you think that is during a restructuring or redundancy process?
Absolutely fundamental, absolutely crucial. I read something, I can't think where it was, but just in the last couple of days, that was basically saying, you know, if you've got a poor relationship with your board before this kind of thing happens, well, it isn't going to get any better if you have a situation like this. So you need to be working with your board and have that really, really good relationship with them. I've got good relationship with our chair. We have a vice chair, we have a treasurer. All of our board members, we've always worked really hard to make them all involved and have sort of different points of connection with the organisation. We'd worked to have communication between the leadership team in particular and the board, so it wasn't just this totally invisible body. It was a group of people that some people were familiar with, more than others. I think if I could have made that, if that would be an area of improvement, would probably to have made the board more visible before this happened. Because for some people it was still, gosh, who are these people? And who are these people that are ultimately making decisions about my life, about my job? So anything you can do to plan, to have those better relationships with board is really, really important. One challenge that I recognised quite early on was we'd have perhaps a kind of day every year or two where we get together, the board and staff team, and perhaps look at strategy or look at something like that. And you kind of quickly realised how just with natural staff turnover, you kind of think, oh, well, they met quite recently. And then you realise that, you know, a third of your team haven't met quite recently with the board. So anything you can do beforehand to build those relationships is really, really important, and have that trust and transparency. We'd worked on a Good Governance Award, so we had that in place. I think our board is and was very, very strong on governance. But when something like this happens, it's a shock. It's we didn't see it. We didn't see it coming. As I was saying earlier about the kind of funding, we'd always just worked really hard, and we brought the funding in, and then all of a sudden, just working really hard and working smart just wasn't working anymore. So I think that came as a period of shock for the board, of like, gosh, what are we actually faced with here? And we need to make decisions, and we need to start this process. I'm not going to say those were easy conversations. Even if you've got a good relationship, those are still difficult conversations to be had. But the board was robust, was understood governance. So it wasn't that they were kind of learning that on the hoof. They knew what their responsibilities were from the off, and they faced them and took them squarely.
Yeah, that's really good advice to take forward as well for others. So I'm conscious of time, Glenn, because we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for questions. So just one more question for me, and it's probably a big question, but if you were advising another chief executive in the charity sector who's about to embark on a significant restructure or a redundancy process, what would be your top 3 tips for preparing or navigating through it then?
I'd probably say plan. Now maybe that's a reflection of me, in that I'm quite happy to kind of, you know, move in any situation quite quickly, quite dynamically, make decisions quite quickly. This is an area where you need to have thought through, almost like a decision tree, and kind of think, right, what are the things we need to do, and then which directions might they go in. So having, you know, really planning the process, planning for different eventualities, different courses of action, literally sitting down and writing those letters, writing those scripts, writing those communication announcements, having as many of those things planned and prepared beforehand. Because once we made that announcement, there was no going back. There was no like, oh, we've changed our mind, or we've like, it's like we've made the announcement. It is phenomenal how quickly news travels. Just kind of a real aside, but I don't know if any of you read the Hollywood magazine. I've been trying to get into there for years, and guess what? As soon as a charity is closing down, they want to talk, and it's in the latest issue of the Hollywood magazine that people know how it's closing down and the problems around funding. So things move really, really quickly. So, you know, having those plans in place for different eventualities. So don't just kind of think, you know, this is the way I think it'll go. Think about all the different combinations of that, and do that with your board, and do that with your leadership team. And actually that process of planning helps you then to do things better, because you then have conversations and think, oh, actually, there's a better way of doing that, or a different way of doing that. So Rona, that was a complete cheat. You asked for 3 things and I gave you 1. plan, and more planning.
Yeah, but there's a lot in that. I guess I would just add to that obviously with consultation with your reps or employees, they might come forward with suggestions. So you can plan, but be prepared for plans to change as well if some thoughts or ideas come up that take you in a different direction.
Yeah, I don't mean plan as in you've decided on the end point. And that's what I'm saying, where there's got to be kind of multiple plans. So you're looking at all those different sort of different eventualities. And absolutely. And I remember at one point, the consultation group really kind of pushing back in terms of like, has the decision been made? Is there, you know, if we're going through this consultation process, is it meaningful? Is it real? Can we actually bring anything new to the table? And it was like, no, this is a genuine, you know, if we've missed something, we really want to know, and this is the opportunity to do that. In terms of time, 30 days isn't much time to put in place something which is going to rescue an organization and rescue jobs. But yeah, we had to be open to those things, and the board as well were really, really clear. We had kind of regular check-in points in terms of progress. The board met with me every single week. So that was, you know, we were kind of updating those things in real time as we worked through it.
Yeah, and you actually produced a document of all the ideas that you had looked at, because some had been looked at before consultation started. And I think that was really useful for employees to see the extent of alternatives that had been thought of and looked into as well.
Yeah, it wasn't when we started the process, it wasn't as if we hadn't done anything up until that point. We'd done a lot of things up until that point. And this was really the last course of action, was actually we need to throw this open to the whole team, and see if there's a way through this to get a different answer.
Yeah, excellent. I'm going to just pop this on the screen quickly. Essentially, this is a summary of what we've been saying throughout, Glenn. So just some top tips really for anyone who might be facing a significant period of change is being clear and consistent with communications, engaging with staff as early as possible to get their ideas as well, and be open, honest, empathetic communication style. It all seems obvious, but once these things are emphasized, it makes a huge difference to the impact of any change that's been implemented. Okay. So I feel like we've done quite well, Glenn, but we've actually left time for questions. So well done for that. I've popped on the screen here the QR codes that we have. So if everybody could scan that, that's really important for our guest speakers to get some feedback, and obviously for ourselves. We run webinars fairly regularly. So it would be great if we can get some feedback. And we did also talk about where to get information. So there's some links on the screen here, but don't worry about having to click on them quickly or get copies of them, because that will come out after today as well. And then yeah, the last slide is thank you. So I will end the show, and that'll give us a chance to touch base with Lindsay, who's been managing the chat box. And are there any questions to put forward, Lindsay?
While waiting for questions, just to reiterate, Rona, you're offering kind of an hour of your time, but I'm really happy for people to contact me. My email was on that last slide, I think. You'll find me on LinkedIn, etc. Really happy for people to contact me with any questions that they can that they have.
Okay, so we've got a question from Darren Campbell-Pike from Cornerstone, and Darren's asked, has the recent planned increase in national insurance played a role in your decision making?
Yeah, great question. This was something that happened sort of, I think, after we closed for consultation, and it was almost one of those factors of like, oh, and there's another, cost we would have had to have found for next year. We, like many charities, worked out the impact of that, and it would have cost people now around £20,000 additional national insurance. So I suppose it was one of those factors after the event, but it was another factor that was like, gosh, we made the decision that we had to make.
Darren had another one as well, and he said, roughly at what time did you realise that this was something you needed to take forward? And he just said it was helpful to see the sort of warning date to the end of the process.
So I think there's a slide. Again, the slides are going to be sent around everybody after the webinar. It all moved really quite quickly. We had that conversation where I was asking questions in terms of the work we had done. So kind of like during the summertime, we'd had, I remember one meeting with our leadership team. I remember looking at with a finance subgroup and starting to kind of, things, our finances weren't looking like they would normally look at that time in the year. So that sense of the canyon, that not only was it that we were short of funding in year, but there wasn't the funding that we would expect to start to see fall into place for 25, 26. So that, I suppose, happened during the summer. And then come September, it was really quick realization that the things that had worked for us for the last 9, 10, 11 years in terms of fundraising were not working anymore. And if we didn't take quick action, we would be at risk of insolvency.
Thanks, Glenn. I've got a question from, let me find it. Morna Ome, and Morna's asked, at what stage in the process were the volunteers brought into the conversation?
So, as I was saying earlier, once you make an announcement, it's amazing how quickly that news spreads. So, and that was part of the planning. So we had communications already kind of written. So our volunteers found out almost at the same time as the staff team, and were brought into. We as an organisation, we've always invested really heavily in volunteers, interns, and placement students. So we actually had 2 dedicated members of staff for our VIPs, which really helped us. Not every organisation will have that. So not only did they have established good relationships, good ways of working, it meant that they could have conversations with people, really, that were constructive and productive. As an aside, one of our projects is to run a canal boat on the Union Canal called All Aboard. And we have around just over 20 volunteers as part of that project. And I'm still in contact with them currently. And it looks like another organisation will be able to take on the running of the boat and take on those volunteers as well. We'll have hopefully a good outcome that we can announce sort of mid-February on that front. So yeah, we're still supporting some volunteers right up until now.
I've got a question from Sarah at Life Care. It's a nice one. She said, knowing Glenn, I'm sure he made sure his team were supported throughout, but as a leader, it must have been tough. Did he find support, and if so, who? Is he willing to share where from?
Hi, Sarah. Yes, I mean, I suppose that was a kind of nod to the bit where you just want to go home and metaphorically kick the dog. I don't have a dog, but kick somebody. Sadly, it's our loved ones, isn't it? It's my wife, it's my 3 boys that probably got the grumpy Glenn. So that's kind of part of the story. Having a really good relationship with my chair. He's absolutely fantastic and was more than robust enough to take the moments when I was like, having to sound off to somebody. That's really important. And the sector, it's been overwhelming how many people have reached out and said, Glenn, how can I help? Do you want a coffee? Is there anything I can do? And it's like, use those kinds of supports. I had a coach, a mentor that I had a kind of a relationship with as well. That was helpful. So a number of different avenues for support. Rona, I'm sure you got some of my frustrated type moments and times as well, of like, how's this going to work? One organization with group of professionals we've not mentioned is our accountants. So again, through this process, I think it's on your slide, Rona, where you talk about the 7 different stages. We had to work really closely with our accountants, obviously around sort of the our finances, but just working out things like redundancy payments, working out final salary, final holiday payments, those kinds of things. So again, that's another source of support and a kind of a buffer. In the same way we had a good relationship with McKinney HR before this, we've got a great relationship with our accountants as well. So we could have some of those robust, let's call them frustrated conversations. Yeah. Any more questions?
That's it from the chat, but Glenn wrote that, thank you so much, Glenn. Your calm approach to thinking the unthinkable is so commendable. People extend so much energy trying to resuscitate ailing finances with the hope that something in terms of core funding will turn up. Really admire your timely risk management and taking the appropriate action before insolvency will enlarge.
Thank you. What more can we say, Rona? That's a beautiful.
I know, that is a lovely way to end. And the purpose of this webinar, we wanted to try and get some good out of the situation from People Know How. So I really hope that people are able to take some of your advice, top tips, information away and use it in their own situations. And yeah, we're spot on 1 o'clock, so amazing timing. But there will be more information coming out, so it's not the end. If you do want to keep contact with either myself through McKinney HR or Glenn, you'll get our contact details shortly. So thanks to everyone for coming along today. We'll end the webinar there.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.